What if we told you that one man attended dinner parties with King Louis XV, helped Catherine the Great seize the Russian throne, and watched Jesus Christ carry the cross to his crucifixion? For over 200 years, witnesses across Europe swore they saw the same face, the same man, never aging a single day. His name was the Count of Saint-Germain, and the truth about him turned out to be stranger than any legend. December 1745 was a dangerous time to be a stranger in London. The Jacobite rebellion had torn Britain apart, and government agents were hunting for spies in every coffeehouse across the city. Paranoia lurked in the shadows of every conversation, and anyone without proper identification became an immediate suspect. Then the authorities found someone who raised every possible red flag. English officers dragged a mysterious stranger from a London establishment on suspicion of espionage. When they searched him, they discovered something that defied all explanation. His pockets were stuffed with diamonds. We're not talking about a few stones here. The interrogation that followed only deepened the mystery surrounding this stranger. He revealed nothing about his origins, his purpose in England, or the source of his wealth. But he demonstrated talents that left his captors genuinely bewildered. He played the violin with such extraordinary mastery that even the men questioning him stopped to listen in amazement. He spoke multiple languages with apparent fluency and carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of aristocracy. When they pressed him for a name, he offered only this: the Count of Saint-Germain. We know these details because of a letter that survived to the present day. On December 9, 1745, Horace Walpole, the famous English writer and politician, wrote to his friend Sir Horace Mann, describing this bizarre arrest. This letter still exists today and has been preserved in the Yale edition of Horace Walpole's correspondence. Walpole wrote that people called the stranger Italian, Spanish, and Polish. Some said he had married a wealthy woman in Mexico and fled with her jewels to Constantinople. Others insisted he was a priest or a nobleman of vast importance. And 13 years later, this mysterious figure resurfaced in the most dangerous and glamorous court in all of Europe. He appeared at Versailles, the legendary palace of French royalty, where he would perform feats that made kings and queens question the very laws of nature itself. The year 1758 marked the beginning of the most extraordinary chapter in the Count's documented life. He arrived at the court of King Louis XV, dressed like a man who had never known a single day of poverty. He wore velvet clothes of the finest quality, rings adorned every finger, and diamonds glittered from his person everywhere you looked. And once again, nobody at court could explain where all of this wealth had originated. Within just a few weeks of his arrival, the Count had become the most sought-after guest in all of France. Even the great Voltaire, perhaps the most brilliant and skeptical mind in Europe, took notice of this peculiar stranger. In a letter to Frederick II of Prussia, dated April 15, 1760, preserved in the Correspondance de Voltaire, he wrote about the Count using words that would echo through centuries of legend. But the Count possessed a particular talent that set him apart from every other brilliant man at Versailles. He claimed to have discovered the philosopher's stone. According to centuries of alchemical tradition, this legendary substance granted immortality to whoever possessed it and could transform base metals like lead into pure gold. The Count never ate at the lavish banquets of Versailles. While nobles gorged themselves on the finest cuisine, he simply sipped from a small vial he called his special elixir. Then comes Giacomo Casanova. Yes, that Casanova. The legendary adventurer, professional seducer, and let us be completely honest here, one of the most skilled con artists who ever lived. If anyone in Europe could recognize a scam, it was definitely this man. Casanova met Saint-Germain in Paris in 1757 and left behind a detailed account in his famous memoirs titled Histoire de ma vie. He called the Count a man intended by nature to be the king of impostors and quacks. The real test came from King Louis XV himself. The king possessed a flawed diamond valued at 240 louis that would be worth 400 louis without the defect. He challenged Saint-Germain to fix it. We know what happened because Madame du Hausset, personal maid to the king's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, kept detailed records. Her memoirs remain one of the most reliable sources for Louis XV's court. The count took the diamond and returned it 1 month later, wrapped in fire-resistant cloth. Louis was so impressed that he gave the count his own laboratory inside the royal palace. But then something happened that proved far harder to dismiss. Madame du Hausset recorded that an elderly noblewoman named the Comtesse de Gergy approached the count at a party. She recognized him from Venice nearly 50 years earlier and asked if perhaps his father had been there. "No, madam," the count replied with perfect calm. "It was I who had the honor of paying you court." He described in perfect detail the gown she wore, the dance they shared, and a private conversation about the Sultan's mechanical bird that sang without winding. He recalled her husband losing 3,000 ducats gambling that night and their entire estate 2 years later. The Comtesse stood frozen. The man she met 50 years ago appeared about 45 years old. The man standing before her now appeared about 45 years old. He had not aged a single day. "You must be 100 years old," she whispered. The count smiled. "That is not impossible." But the count was lying about his true age. According to what he would later reveal, the actual number was closer to 2,000. Witnesses across Paris began whispering that the count did not learn about history from books like ordinary scholars. The count described the court of Emperor Nero with calm, precise details that appeared in no known historical record. He spoke as if he had been there. He claimed to remember the hanging gardens of Babylon clearly, describing Nebuchadnezzar walking among the greenery at dawn, whispering about dreams he believed were messages from the gods. He talked about the Great Fire of Rome with unsettling familiarity, insisting Nero did not start it, but did play his lyre while the city burned. "Quite beautifully," he said. Most disturbing of all, the count spoke of the apostles of Jesus Christ as if they were close friends. This impossible first-hand knowledge led scholars to a chilling theory. Some believed the count was actually Cartaphilus, the legendary figure known as the Wandering Jew. According to medieval legend, Cartaphilus was a porter for Pontius Pilate who struck Jesus as he carried the cross. Jesus turned to him and said, "I shall go and rest, but you shall not rest until I return." Cartaphilus was cursed with immortality, forced to wander the earth until the second coming. The legend matched Saint-Germain's own descriptions too closely to ignore. But the count wasn't just watching history, he appeared to be shaping it. Records place him in Russia during the conspiracy that brought Catherine the Great to power. British officers reported seeing him in India, speaking fluent Hindi. He even taught hypnosis to a young physician named Anton Mesmer, whose name would later define the practice itself. Then there was America. A popular legend claimed a mysterious stranger inspired the signing of the Declaration of Independence before vanishing without a trace. Historians later proved this story was fiction, traced to a 19th century novel and later embellished by occult writers. What is certain, however, is this. The Count of Saint-Germain eventually settled in a German prince's castle. He lived quietly for 5 years. He aged. His health failed. For the first time, the immortal appeared mortal. And on February 27th, 1784, the supposedly immortal man finally died. His funeral was attended by royalty. It seemed the legend had reached its end. But less than 1 year after they put him in the ground, witnesses across Europe began reporting something impossible. The Count had returned from the dead. The Count of Saint-Germain died in the town of Eckernförde, Germany. We know this with certainty because the church records documenting his death still exist. The death register of St. Nikolai Church read, "The so-called Count of Saint-Germain and Weldon died February 27th, 1784. buried March 2nd. Here was a detail that completely demolished the legend of the fabulously wealthy count who carried diamonds everywhere. He died in such poverty that his estate could not even cover the basic burial costs. He received a free burial only because Prince Karl of Hesse-Kassel, his patron and friend, intervened out of personal respect. The estate inventory revealed the pathetic truth: just 82 Reichsthalers in cash, some clothing in various states of wear, razors and sunglasses, and nothing else. Then the sightings began. In 1785, the French Freemasons allegedly chose the Count as their representative. He appeared at diplomatic meetings across Europe. In 1789, he supposedly returned to France with an urgent warning. "The Bastille will fall," he told the Queen's confidant. "Marie Antoinette must flee immediately." The most elaborate accounts came from memoirs attributed to the Comtesse d'Adhémar, who claimed to meet the Count multiple times after his death, as late as 1820, when he announced he was leaving for the Himalayas but would return in 82 years. It was an extraordinary story, and it was completely fake. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France attributed these memoirs to Baron Étienne Léon de la Mothe-Langon, whom French sources described as the greatest of all literary forgers. He produced 65 novels and 16 fake memoirs during his lifetime. The d'Adhémar memoirs were published in 1836, 14 years after the supposed author died, with no verifiable family documentation. Every single post-death sighting of the Count traced back to this one fraudulent source. But if the supernatural sightings were fake, the legend was only getting started. Exactly 82 years after the Count's supposed final prophecy, in 1902, a wealthy aristocrat moved into a mansion in the French quarter of New Orleans. He looked identical to portraits of the Count painted 150 years earlier. He claimed to be a descendant, and he had developed a very particular interest in human blood. In 1902, a mysterious man named Jacques Saint-Germain threw extravagant parties in his mansion at 1039 Royal Street. He spoke flawless French, possessed encyclopedic historical knowledge, and looked exactly like the original Count. He never ate at his own parties, just stood by the window sipping from a goblet. One night, a woman fell from his second-story balcony. She claimed she had jumped to escape because Jacques had grabbed her, held her down, and bitten her neck. Police broke down the door. Jacques had completely vanished. In the kitchen, they found no food, but rows of wine bottles containing red wine mixed with human blood. It was a genuinely terrifying story, perfect for ghost tours and vampire novels, and there was absolutely no evidence that any of it had ever actually happened. Researcher A.P. Sylvia conducted a detailed investigation published in Locations of Law in 2022. Searches of early 20th century New Orleans newspapers found no mention of this incident. The city directory listed a Jacques Saint-Germain as a laborer, not a wealthy aristocrat. Property records showed no owner named Saint-Germain at that address during the relevant period. But the 20th century would produce one more dramatic chapter. On January the 28th, 1972, Richard Chamfray appeared on the French television program Le Troisième A, claiming to be the 17,000-year-old Count of Saint-Germain. He set up an alchemical furnace called an athanor, melted a lead bar, added a mysterious powder, and waited for the metal to cool. When it solidified, the lead had become gold. Professional jewelers examined the result and confirmed it was genuine. Journalist Pascal Séverin, who wrote a book promoting Chamfray's claims in 1973, later publicly admitted the entire book was fake. Chamfray's longtime partner, the famous singer Dalida, reportedly had no illusions about his tendency toward elaborate myth-making. Richard Chamfray was born April 4th, 1940, in Lyon, France. Before reinventing himself as an immortal count, he served 7 years in prison for theft. On July 21, 1983, police found him dead in Ramatuelle. having asphyxiated himself in a car with exhaust fumes. The man who claimed on national television that he could never die had chosen the time and manner of his own ending, but the exposure of hoaxes and forgeries still did not explain everything about the original Count. When Saint-Germain died in 1784, something was very wrong with the scene. His possessions had been stripped away almost completely. His grave would later be destroyed by natural forces, and the church records that proved his death contained certain details that some researchers believed were better left unexamined. The historical Count of Saint-Germain was unquestionably a real person. Primary sources from Horace Walpole, Madame du Hausset, Casanova, Voltaire, and Prince Karl of Hesse-Kassel all documented his existence in considerable detail. The supernatural immortal Count, on the other hand, was a fabrication built on forgeries and wishful thinking. The post-death sightings traced to forged memoirs written by a known literary con artist. The New Orleans vampire story had no documentary evidence whatsoever. The Declaration of Independence speech came from an 1847 novel. Richard Chamfray was a convicted thief performing magic tricks. When authorities arrested the Count in 1745, they noted his English was broken and his French carried a regional accent from near the Italian border. Voltaire's famous quote about the man who never dies was sarcasm, mocking the Count's ridiculous claims. Even Casanova called him intended by nature to be the king of impostors. The most credible theory came from the Count's own deathbed confession. Prince Karl recorded that Saint-Germain claimed to be the son of Prince Francis II Rákóczi of Transylvania, an exiled Hungarian revolutionary. This would explain his education, his wealth, his acceptance at royal courts, and his desperate need to hide his identity from Habsburg authorities. The story of the Count of Saint-Germain was almost certainly debunked by the weight of historical evidence. Almost certainly, but somewhere out there in the world right now, a man of average height and indeterminate age might be playing violin at a dinner party, telling impossible stories containing details no book ever recorded, sipping something from a glass no one else was permitted to taste. So, what do you think? Was the Count of Saint-Germain a brilliant con artist, or is there something deeper hiding in this story that the historical record simply cannot explain?